Well, this is the week you've waited for all season. The blood, the sweat, the tears, the long hours of research will either pay off over the final 2 weeks of the fantasy football season, or you'll have to second-guess yourself until next year's draft. We know how important this week is, too, which is why we're going to provide the best analysis on the most important questions you're asking yourself, including who to start and who to sit for Week 15. Game day is here as OFN Fantasy Football on the Our Football Radio Network starts now. All right, I'm Greg DePalma. Welcome to another Sunday morning game day edition of OFN Fantasy Football for December 17th, 2017. And we've got semifinals this week already underway. 3 games already off the board. And a bunch more today. And then, of course, one more game tomorrow night, which could be pretty important with Mr. Julio Jones taking the field. Let's welcome in my co-hosts. First of all, he's the chief fantasy analyst at ourlads.com, co-host of the Bill Roden on Sports podcast on iTunes, Jamal Murphy. So, Jamal, you have anything going? Any more? You had one more playoff team. Are they still alive?
No, I lost a heartbreaker. I think I lost by like 2 or 3 points last week, thanks to a late Brady to Cook's reception. So that hurt me. But I'm living vicariously through my wife, who's still alive, against you this week, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is in the league that we're competing in, we've got three out of the 4. So you got your wife, me, and Dan. As I welcome in Dan Weinrich to the program. Dan, you got a whole bunch of teams in the playoffs, at least as far as last week. How you doing?
I'm good. I went 3-1 as I hoped. So I have 4, and I had 1 bye, so I have 4. I'm going in 4 of my 6 leagues this week. So hopefully I'll have another winning week and cash out for just in time for the holidays.
All right, sounds good. So the championship week, of course, next week we'll have our final show next week for the season to get you ready for championship week. And so best of luck to everybody out there. All right, now what has taken place over the last several days? I guess yesterday it was a pretty big game between the Chargers and the Chiefs. And anything surprising come out of yesterday, Jamal, as far as you're concerned? Anything that caught you off guard? Any big disappointments or anybody that, of course, if they had Tyreek Hill. I mean, I had Tyreek Hill. I actually did. I was 2 out of 3 this weekend because I picked the Chiefs to win. I had Tyreek Hill in my one fantasy league, and yet I had 3 Chargers in our fantasy league. So I had a bad and 2 goods. So because the Chargers came in red hot going into Kansas City, and their offense just didn't get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, to me, fantasy-wise, that was the surprise in that game. I mean, Rivers didn't perform all that well in terms of stats. Kelsey Kelsey didn't play well in the Chiefs game. For the Chiefs in that game, Allen gets hurt, gets carted off the field, so he doesn't produce like you would have liked. Henry didn't play well, so I mean, it was a bunch of duds fantasy-wise in the Chiefs, except for Gordon, of course, who went off. So
true.
If you had him, you're pretty lucky. But that's about it. And, for the most part, it was a bunch of duds fantasy-wise in that game.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, I was in one of those tough positions because, see, I actually, of course, I had Aaron Rodgers on my team. When the season began, he gets hurt. I have Philip Rivers as my backup, and Rivers is playing pretty awesome over the last, during the winning streak. He's doing a good job. I mean, overall, he's definitely been at least minimum 20 or possibly more. So I had to, and when I picked Aaron Rodgers back up after dropping him, I picked him up like about a month ago. To tell you the truth, when I picked him up, I'll be honest with you, I picked him up because, one, I was thinking, all right, if he comes back like he's supposed to run the playoffs, having a backup quarterback's not a bad idea. And you never know, maybe I'll need him to start. But really, I picked him up because I didn't want anybody else to get him. So I was like, you know what? If I have to go into the postseason and I don't want to go up against the guy I drafted, so I just picked him up. And then I just didn't think it was a good idea to start him because you just don't have any idea what you're going to get out of him tomorrow. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you have to start him. And you know what? I think as we've always talked about on this show, that all depends on who else you have. I mean, if you don't have a top 10 quarterback, then yeah, you definitely start him. But if you've got a guy like a top 10 quarterback, it's kind of tough to say, okay, yeah, Aaron Rodgers is going to have a tremendous game today. And it's a no-brainer to start him.
Well, I do think he will have a big game because I think that Carolina is going to I think they're tougher on the run in general.
Oh, yeah, the secondary is terrible.
Yeah, and I think that's what the game script will prescribe, and I feel like it'll be a bit of a shootout. But I mean, if you'd asked me before the game, I don't know if I would have recommended starting Rivers over Rodgers, but they're very close to me for me. I mean, I certainly wouldn't rank Rodgers where I would have ranked him before the injury because there definitely is a possibility that he's not right. We're just assuming because
that's the thing. You don't know.
Yeah.
And when you're in the playoffs and you're in that situation and if you have a guy like Rivers, you just can't say, oh yeah, I'll start Rodgers, and he goes out there and after a quarter he can't go no more, and you're screwed. And you're like, oh, and I could have started Rivers. I just lost 20 points. So it's one of those things that again, it all depends on who you have. I mean, I guess if there's other. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how we would compare other quarterbacks, but I mean, I'm not going to sit here all day and have like 10 quarterbacks and say, would you or won't you? But that's a tough decision for everybody today.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're also dealing with probably the best quarterback in the league. The other side of it is, he's going to be fresh. He doesn't have those other nagging injuries that everybody else has. So it is, it's a tough decision. I would say if you have a
let me ask you a question. If you had Cam Newton, Sunday, how about Cam Newton, Jamal? Cam Newton or Aaron Rodgers? Who would you start today?
I think I'd go Cam Newton.
Would you agree with that, Dan?
Nope, I'd go Rodgers. Cam has been wildly inconsistent this year, and he's not. The only guys. There are probably about like 5 guys that I would start over Rodgers. Brady, Big Ben.
Well, of course, those are your elite quarterbacks.
Yeah, but Cam is not fantasy-wise certainly has not been an elite quarterback this year. He's around that probably like number 10 mark. So I wouldn't. I'd probably start Dak over Aaron Rodgers. I think he'll have a big day today.
You would start Dak Prescott over Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah,
really?
Today. Yeah, he's got a really juicy matchup. So
okay. See, now I wouldn't do that, but that's why it's just so difficult because you get so many different opinions on the whole subject. Normally, it's a no-brainer. You're going to start Rodgers all the time. But this is one of those reasons where you're like, okay, well, matchup, okay, this guy. So both of you guys have already, made different opinions on depending on who the matchup was and who the quarterback is.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, if you have two, between Phillip Rivers, Dak Prescott, Stafford, Rodgers, Newton, if you have 2 of these guys on your team, you're probably in a good position. And they're probably both. You would expect any of these guys to have a good week, although we just saw with Phillip Rivers yesterday.
You never know.
You never know.
That's the thing.
That's the heartbreaking part of fantasy.
Yep. And maybe, and of course, next week's completely different, because it doesn't even matter even though it's going up against the Vikings, which is a really tough defense. Once you get Aaron Rodgers in there for a week, then he becomes your starter. Then it doesn't even matter, right? Who your matchup is. I mean, would you? I mean, I wouldn't. I'd be like, I don't care who it is. I'm playing Aaron Rodgers next week because I know he's already healthy after a week. Jamal?
Yeah, of course. And like I said, it goes back to him being who he is. He's Aaron Rodgers, the best quarterback, if not the best quarterback in the league. If he just comes back and shows you he's okay health-wise, there's no question you start him. This week, he starts over most quarterbacks. I just want to make a point going back to Cam Newton. He still is a top 10 fantasy quarterback. He's about 7 or 8. And people forget about the rushing aspect of his game. He has 5 rushing touchdowns. He's rushed for over 500 yards, close to 600 yards. That's more than any quarterback. So he does give you points even when he doesn't play well passing. So that's a consideration.
All right. And the other thing, though, Dan, that is very important is the skill position players for the Packers. What do you think about? Because remember, Jordy Nelson, not Devontae Adams, is Aaron Rodgers' go-to guy. And Devontae Adams became the number one receiver with Aaron Rodgers out. So now Aaron Rodgers is back. Matter of fact, I even picked up Randall Cobb because I have a very, kind of tough decision to make on who my last receiver is going to be. And I figured, hey man, Cobb's just as good as the other guys I have. So I'll get into that in a minute. But what do you think about who would you go with, Devontae Adams or Jordy Nelson?
I think Devontae has established himself as the number one guy, and I think it's regardless of who's at quarterback. Because you have to remember, I mean, Jordy Nelson and Aaron Rodgers definitely have that sort of ESP chemistry. They have they rank, I think, in the top 5 of all those top quarterback receiver combo categories. But Jordy Nelson is, I think, 32 or 33. And Devontae Adams, I think, is like 25. And he definitely emerged last year as a huge red zone threat for Rodgers, sort of, just behind Jordy. And I think that he's going to continue to be the guy. I mean, he just showed really dynamic stuff the last couple of weeks. Scoring like a wide receiver 1 with Brett Hundley behind center. So I do like Jordy too, but I like Adams a little bit better.
All right. Jamal?
Yeah, I got to go with Adams. It's not, like Dan said, he's been performing so well with Hundley, and maybe that's just a connection or whatever. But it's not like when Rodgers was in the lineup, he was also heavily going to Adams, and Adams was having, was a wide receiver 2 at the very least in those situations. Of course, I do expect Jordy Nelson to be much better than he has been the last 4 weeks or so that he's been playing with Hundley. He's been pretty much a fantasy non-factor. So I expect him to at least get back into the factor range as far as fantasy football goes, and have a decent game. But if you have to choose between those two, I think Adams has more potential to have the bigger game.
Yeah, keep in mind that Nelson had, I think it was 3, as at least as far as the points go in our league, he had 3 out of the 4 games that he played at the beginning of the season with Rodgers. He had 20 points or more. Right. So that's now. How about and again, this is a secondary. See, I do think this. I do like the Packers today. I mean, I expect this, just like you said, Dan. I do expect this to be a high-scoring game. I will say that. I wonder how much the running game is going to come into play, because this is also going to be huge for the Packers. It looks like they have decided to go to Jamal Williams as the number 1 guy over Aaron Jones. So you don't play Jones at all at this point. Williams is obviously a definite start, but this is something also to keep in mind that Aaron Rodgers, this is the reason why they're so dangerous right now, because they're going to have some balance, and we'll find out how much that may take away from Aaron, who didn't exactly have a big running game early on in the season.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it can only help Rodgers. I don't think anything takes anything away from him to have the running game. And really, you just mentioning that makes me more confident in the running game this week. I hadn't really thought about it that way. The fact that you have Rodgers back, Carolina is a tough running defense. So at first glance, you'd say, a guy like Jamal Williams may struggle. But the fact that Aaron Rodgers is back and the passing threat is going to be there, it's going to probably open up holes for the running game.
Should.
So I think it helps everybody.
Yep. Now, who would you start, Dan? Because this is one of those. Actually, I've got a couple, but with Chris Hogan coming back, he's got the 1 week under his belt. He had 180 yards and 2 touchdowns in the championship game last year against the Steelers. You got Martavis Bryant, Paul Richardson, Kelvin Benjamin, and Randall Cobb. So out of that group, what would you do? I mean, I'm actually thinking about Hogan. For me, it's coming down to Hogan, Cobb, and Bryant. I'm leaning towards Hogan, but I'm actually also kind of considering Cobb. It's just it's tough for me. I mean, I know Hogan's going to be okay. I know they're still listed as questionable, all that, but he played last week. There were no setbacks, so week 2 should be a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, it basically, I think, comes down to where they rank within their offense. And I think Hogan is a slightly higher priority for Brady than Cobb is for Aaron Rodgers. I feel like Hogan is more has been more consistent in the game she's played. Cobb has had big games, and he's had games where he's been completely invisible. So I think I'd probably lean towards Hogan in between those two, and definitely like Bryant this week.
Yeah, remember early on in the season, you do like Bryant this week?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing that I have to think about as well, because with the bad game that my players had yesterday, Jamal, I may have to think, well, do I kind of go for more of a boom bust guy and hope I get the boom with Martavis, because I need a boom, or do I just say, you know what, I can't afford to have a really bad spot here, and I'm going to need at least something consistent. Maybe I should go back to Randall Cobb, because I remember early on in the season when I had him, he was doing well, and he was actually one of your sleepers early on in the season after because he got off to a good start.
Right. I think Cobb is another interesting guy. I think he's definitely. Definitely have to consider him with Rodgers coming back. He did have a decent game last week with Hundley, but he was very inconsistent with Hundley. He'd be targeted 8 times one game and 2 times the next. That was sort of the case with Aaron Rodgers also. The problem is Aaron Rodgers has a lot of weapons. We'll get to see who his true favorite is in this game. His first game back, we're going to see who he's going to lean on. It could be Nelson. It could be Adams, and it could be Cobb, because Cobb has had big games with Rodgers in the past. I think he's a decent gamble. I think Cobb is, especially with everybody else you mentioned is a gamble as well. So you have pretty much a crapshoot going on there.
All right. As far as the Panthers are concerned, Devin Funchess is supposed to play. That's the latest that we're hearing. So, and of course, he's the main guy there for Cam Newton. What about Jonathan Stewart? Now, Jonathan Stewart, I actually have him in my league as well. I like, of course, I have Marshawn Lynch, and Lynch has also been coming on a lot better. And you got to think that maybe that's not a coincidence, Dan, that Lynch has played his best football over the last 4 or 5 games after being retired last year. So I'm actually, this is a tough decision. Stewart is a player that did not play well early on this season, but he has historically been a better second half runner. Physical guy, maybe that of course helps at this time of year. So it's a tough one. I'm leaning towards Lynch, but I'm still thinking about it. What do you think?
I would definitely start beast mode in that between those two over Jay Stu. Jonathan Stewart's had a great couple of weeks, but he's been the featured back, or at least the early down back, all season long, and he has a preponderance of ineffectual fantasy games.
Yep.
And he has had a few big ones recently, but I still just don't trust him week to week.
Yep.
And he certainly doesn't have a bad matchup, but I think Marshawn Lynch at home is going to have a pretty big week. So I like Marshawn.
All right, Jamal, do you have any? Now, of course, your playoff teams are out, but do you have any interesting starter sit questions for us today?
Well, looking at my wife's team, she had some interesting decisions. Starting at quarterback, we talked about Cam Newton earlier, but she had a choice between Cam Newton, Jared Goff, and had a choice between also with Stafford. So it was between Stafford, Goff, and Newton. She left Stafford on the bench last night. He had a pretty good game, 20 points plus. So now it's between Newton and Goff. She's leaning towards Newton. What would you guys do?
Well, again, she's playing me, but I would go with Newton. I mean, I think it makes the most sense because I'll tell you one thing. Those Rams-Seattle matchups the last couple of years have been usually pretty defensive. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to happen today. Bobby Wagner is banged up. KJ Wright's banged up. They've got the injuries in the secondary. And with Russell Wilson, you never know if you're going to wind up in Seattle in one of these 30s, type games. But just keep that in mind. That's kind of what I'm looking at. Plus, the Packers' secondary isn't all that great either, Dan.
I would definitely go with Newton over Goff, but I would have gone with Stafford if he had asked me yesterday.
All right. Any others from?
Yeah, from that one, I guess the flex position is the only other one I could see here. We got looks like she's going with Robert Woods, and the choice was Rashard Matthews, Peyton Barber, and Wayne Gallman. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, she made the right call there. Yeah. You agree, Dan? Robert Woods?
Yeah, I mean, Peyton Barber is intriguing, but I don't think you can count on him.
No.
So I would go with Robert Woods.
Thing with Woods, he's coming off the injury, hasn't played in about 3 weeks. So we're just, he does have a pretty tough matchup against Seattle. So we're kind of assuming he's just going to pop right back in where he left off. So I think that is a gamble.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things we just talked about with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, normally this would be a no-brainer. The injury is the only reason why we're even thinking about it. But because of that, I gotta assume too that they were targeting this game, and look, even though the Eagle game was a huge game, teams always take the division games always take precedent, especially in like this. So you know what, I wouldn't if they played Seattle last week. I guarantee you Woods would have played.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. Okay, Dan, you got some teams left. So what are your decisions this week?
Well, in my standard scoring league, I've got a real spoil of riches at the wide receiver position, and I have to pick two guys from among this group: Larry Fitzgerald, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Alshon Jeffrey, Cooper Kupp, and Marquise Goodwin.
Two out of that group?
Yeah.
Well, Devontae Adams has to be the first one. Even though I do like Jordy Nelson better than Adams with Rodgers, I will say that. I disagree with you guys. Maybe not today, but I just think Rodgers loves Nelson more than Adams, and I would rather, if I was picking in the draft this year, I would pick Nelson over Adams, but that's me. But I do like Adams out of that group. How about you, Jamal?
You got to give me those names again. That was a lot of guys.
It is Larry Fitzgerald, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Alshon Jeffrey, Cooper Kupp, and Marquise Goodwin.
You need how many?
2.
Wow.
What about Mike Evans? How's he been doing?
I was thinking Mike Evans and Alshon.
Well, Mike Evans has been doing horribly.
Okay.
Actually. Or at least very disappointing for him. The last 2 games, he's had 2 receptions each game. And, he has been double-digit scoring 1 time since week 7.
How about his career, matchup with Atlanta?
I don't have those stats readily available.
I know he had a decent game in the first matchup.
I mean, I'd imagine he has great numbers against them because they play him every year twice, and Mike Evans has been an absolute stud until this year. So I'm leaning towards Devontae Adams and Larry Fitzgerald. Fitz has just had, an amazing year.
I'm not gonna argue with Devontae Adams. Larry Fitzgerald has been, he's been inconsistent this year. Also, he doesn't have a great quarterback throwing to him. Evans seems healthy. That's the key to me. I mean, a lot of Evans' troubles this year have been caused by the inconsistency at quarterback, who not having Jameis there the whole time. He was back for the first time last week, so I guess he gets a pass for that game if he didn't connect with Evans that well. If Evans is healthy, I would be inclined to stick with him.
Yeah, look, the other thing too is Garoppolo is really developing a nice chemistry with Goodwin. We know Goodwin will drop 1 or 2 passes a game, but he's been getting an awful lot of targets. So he's not a bad idea either. It's a tough one. Very tough one. But I think Devontae Adams is the top of the list.
Yeah. I agree with you there. The question is Mike Evans due?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, he's definitely due. But will this be the week that it happens?
Yeah, check out his all-time, because sometimes guys, again, division matchups, sometimes not only are they good, but sometimes they're great. And I think that could be like a big thing because, as we talked about last week, if you've got a matchup, especially division matchups, and he's played them, say, 6 times or 5 times, and he's got all these crazy numbers against him, then that could be something. Make your Monday night fun, too. Last game of the week. Maybe you need him. Maybe he's got to score 10 points to win.
Yeah, that can always backfire.
No, I'm just saying, just for excitement's sake.
Monday night.
It could.
Yeah, and maybe he goes into
for those Brady
concussion protocol in the first half.
Didn't that happen to you last week? You were up 10, and you were against Brady, so you figured you'd have a loss, and Brady didn't even get 12 points.
Yep, that's correct. I thought I had already counted myself out. I was up 12 points going up against Tom Brady, and I was done. And Brady had like 11.8 or something. By the hair of my chinny chin chin.
Crazy. What else you got?
And then at the flex position, I'm basically choosing between Rex Burkhead and one more of any of those guys. So, if you say it seems like the consensus from you guys was probably Devontae Adams and Mike Evans. So then the next question would be Larry Fitzgerald or Rex Burkhead at the flex.
Well, with Burkhead, you know how it is.
I mean, they use the heck out of Burkhead. He didn't do much the second half of the last game, but he went off for about 16 points in the first half. I had been playing him a lot when I was alive, and he came through every week with double-digit points. So they find ways to keep him involved. I'm not sure his health status. I assume he's okay. But if he's healthy, I think
he's got to score a touchdown, though. That's definitely. But he is their touchdown guy.
Yeah, I mean, he scored at least one in 3 straight games. So.
Yeah, so that is. Yeah, I mean, if you think New England-Pittsburgh is going to be a high-scoring game, then by all means. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I'm going with Hogan.
Yeah, and that has high-scoring game written all over it.
Yeah, especially after what happened to Brady last week.
Right.
You would think that would be the assumption, but you never know. What else? What do you got, Dan?
Well, I mean, all right, let's see. I'll give you another one. Those are really my only question marks. But I guess in one league, at the running back position, I'm going against the Yahoo pre-ranks, which Jamal's probably proud of me for doing that. And I'm benching Duke Johnson and starting Alex Collins in front of him.
Yes.
And then here's an interesting spot for my flex in this league. I got to choose between Juju, Lamar Miller, Nelson Aguilar, Isaiah Crowell, and Derrick Henry. One player.
Huh.
Now this is a PPR league.
I wouldn't probably go with Aguilar because you have no idea what kind of chemistry he's going to have with Foles. None.
Yeah. No, I'm leaning Juju.
Yeah, Juju's not a bad idea. Again, high-scoring game.
I guess Lamar Miller would be the other. I know Jamal really likes Derrick Henry this week at San Francisco.
Yeah. Derrick Henry was one of my deep sleepers in the USA Today column. Shameless plug, check that out. But Henry, obviously he's splitting carries still, and that's the big thing with DeMarco Murray. He doesn't get that many carries. But he had a bad week last week, but still had a touchdown. He was held to 20 yards by Arizona. But Arizona has the 7th ranked rushing defenses. The 2 weeks prior, Henry, even, despite only getting, an average of, low teens in carries, had big games, had touchdowns in both of those games. So now they play San Francisco with 25th ranked run defense. I see him being productive again, no matter how many carries he gets. So I think he's a sleeper. You have choices. So you can't argue with you for not playing him. But I think, I see a pretty good game coming from him.
All right. I mean, I know for one thing, I mean, I know we talk about this with the Jets a lot, but with Tennessee, I don't know, for the long run, their fans are better off just moving on. And I think they might have to. I tell you right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee lost their last 3 games. I wouldn't. I think. How bad can that team be coached with the weapons they have, with that offensive line they have, and their offense does nothing? Nothing. I mean, they've averaged 20 points a game over like the recent stretch. I mean, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, and it looks like they have talent on that team.
They do have talent. That's the thing.
So yeah, I don't know what's going on.
That's because Mike Mularkey is in over his head. It's a joke. He's never going to get a head coaching job again. He's one of those situations. Once he gets fired, he's done. He's back to being an assistant the rest of his career. No one's going to hire him. But anyway, there is that. You got to worry about low-scoring games, but all he has to do is, put in 100 plus and a touchdown, and you're golden. Let's see. So again, Coleman's out, and you would think Julio Jones could have another huge monster game, but that also should free things up a little bit for Devontae Freeman, because you got to think the Bucs are gonna, if they had any brains, they would triple cover Jones and force the Falcons to want to rush the football. So Freeman could have an even bigger game today, but he's a must start anyway.
Right.
Let's see. And would you go with Ivory today? Would you start Ivory? Is that like one of those? It all depends. Because she's going to be the number one back, right?
Yeah, it always all depends. But I think he's definitely a solid option with Fournette out. Every time, in the past when Fournette hasn't played, he's had big games. So I think you do go Ivory there.
All right. And let's see. So Hopkins looks like he's going to play, but that's a bad situation if you're going into the playoffs, and even if Savage is down. I can't believe you actually would be feeling bad with Savage going down, but we'll find out about Yates in that matchup against the Jags. So, wow. But you got to start Hopkins anyway, no matter what. Guaranteed, Dan? Is he a guaranteed with the toe injury, with the third-string quarterback against the Jags? Is he a guaranteed starter?
I'm starting him in 2 leagues, and I wouldn't even he's probably the second best wide receiver in the NFL this year.
Okay.
After AB. So, I think you have to start him.
Would you definitely start Robbie Anderson?
I think Robbie Anderson is startable. I wouldn't start him over Marquise Goodwin. I wouldn't start him over Jarvis Landry.
Well, then that's a big question then.
Yeah.
Okay. You agree with that, Jamal?
Yeah, I don't think he's a must start.
You got to get 1 week out of it. You got to see exactly what. Keep in mind when Petty played last year, Petty loved throwing to Robbie Anderson. Just keep that in mind.
Right.
That's when nobody knew who Robbie Anderson was.
This is a true test case for the Jets. You might want to stay away from all Jets. I mean, you got to see what Petty does here first. So whatever Anderson was doing with McCown, I mean, you kind of have to throw it out because it's a whole new situation. We'll see if Anderson still has any kind of chemistry with Petty. But it's a wait and see. So I'd be scared in that situation to start Anderson actually.
Would you go? Here's a question we usually ask almost every week, and they're playing against each other. Would you go Winston or Ryan, Jamal?
I mean, since Ryan pretty much destroyed 3 of my seasons single-handedly, I'm gonna go ahead and be biased and say Jameis Winston.
Wow. Okay. Even against this Bucs secondary, would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. Based on what we've seen so far this year, but I really wouldn't love starting either of those guys. Chances are, if you're starting either of those guys, you're not alive anymore.
All right. Interesting. And Mike Wallace is supposed to play, so that's again he's a borderline starter. He's a number 3, right? He's a possibility, especially the Browns.
Yeah, he's a nice little sleeper. He's been averaging about 70 yards a game for the past 4 weeks or so. Had touchdowns in most of those games. Flacco actually played pretty well last week. I know that's shocking, but Flacco had like 260 something with a couple touchdowns. So I wouldn't be too upset if I had to start Wallace in the game.
Okay. And Roger Lewis, is he the number 1 receiver right now for the Giants? With Shepard, is Shepard healthy?
No, I mean Shepard played last week. I think he had 1 reception with the hamstring. Even if he played, I mean, the answer to that question is they have no number 1 receiver. They barely have any receivers. So
that is true.
Yeah, I would be scared to go with anybody on the Giants.
Yeah.
Receiver wise, I like Ingram at tight end, but any of the receivers I'm scared of.
And Zeke comes back next week, right? Elliott?
Yeah, supposed to, right? That'll be 6 games missed.
Yeah, he's coming back next week.
So he comes back championship week, which could be monstrously huge. That'll be the big story next week on our last show for 2017. And then of course you have do you guys have any leagues or anything that you go into the playoffs with?
No.
You never do any of that stuff? Okay. But they are out there. We won't be doing it, but they are out there. And then you have what do you have? 1 more report or 2 more reports for USA Today, Jamal? How do they work that? Do they care about Week 17?
I'm not sure. I have to look into that. I was assuming 1, but I'm sure I'll be notified if any change.
All right. And you'll be watching the Jet game today?
Probably not. I got a lot of errands to run. Like I said, my team, I have no team in this week of fantasy football for the first time in many years. So I'm a little bitter, and I'll probably I don't know how much football I'm going to watch today actually.
All right. Well, you can root for BPR against my team. And they're looking really good right now. I'm going to need some major. I'm going to need Le'Veon Bell and Mark Ingram to combine for 60 points to have a shot against your wife. So she's looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, crazier things have happened. I hope we saw it last week. So now anything's possible. Keep your hopes up if you're still alive. A lot of players left, a lot of games left today to happen. So everybody still has a chance at this point.
Dan, enjoy. Good luck with all your games. You got a lot of them. How many do you have? 3?
4.
4. Good luck.
Thank you. And as well.
Because you'll be a possible. Yeah, maybe we'll have a chance. Again, we got 3 of us, so hopefully one of us, hopefully 2 out of the 3 gets in, and then at least our little community here gets a win. Because your wife's money is your money, right, Jamal?
That is true.
All right.
That's very true.
That is true. All right, guys, I appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in once again to our Lads OFN fantasy football coverage here on the Our Lads Football Radio Network. We've got another big week in store for you: NFL, college football, all the bowls. So we'll see you in the next 24 hours, and we'll see you next Sunday right here for more fantasy football coverage on the Our Lads Football Radio Network.